This is Land of Havilah, Ezekiel 41. Ezekiel's vision of a temple continues. In the last chapter, an angel showed him the gates, the outer court, the inner court, and the entrance to the main structure. Now continuing to measure the entrance, verse 1. He brought me to the temple and measured the post, 6 cubits wide on the one side and 6 cubits wide on the other side, which was the width of the tent. The width of the entrance was 10 cubits, and the sides of the entrance were 5 cubits on the one side and 5 cubits on the other side. He measured its length 40 cubits and the width 20 cubits. Then he went inward and measured each post of the entrance 2 cubits, and the entrance 6 cubits, and the width of the entrance 7 cubits. He measured its length 20 cubits and the width 20 cubits before the temple. He said to me, "This is the most holy place." Comment in verse 1, the footprint of the posts of the temple, or the door jambs of the entry, were 10.5 by 10.5 feet. This makes complete sense because the outer walls of the temple are the same thickness. And 10.5 feet is no mistake or misprint because the outside walls are all very thick as we go through the text. We're reminded that when the disciples were at the second temple with Jesus, they were in awe and said, "Lord, see what kind of stones and what kind of buildings," Mark 13:1. In verse 2, the opening for the front doors was 17.5 feet across and 8.75 feet in depth. Then in verse 2, the holy place, the largest room of the main building, was 35 feet side to side and 70 feet in length. Moving on to the entry of the most holy place in verse 3, the posts were 3.5 feet wide. The entry was 10.5 feet wide and 12.25 feet long. Here in the transition between the holy place and most holy place, there's no mention of a veil, wall, or door, so the nature of the entry from the holy place to the most holy place is a mystery, other than that it had posts and was 10.5 by 12.25. In verse 4, the most holy place is 35 feet side to side and the same front to back, so it's square. There's no mention of the ceiling height, verse 5. Then he measured the wall of the house 6 cubits, and the width of every side room 4 cubits, all around the house on every side. The side rooms were in 3 stories, one over another, and 30 in order. They entered into the wall which belonged to the house for the side rooms all around, that they might be supported and not penetrate the wall of the house. The side rooms were wider on the higher levels because the walls were narrower at the higher levels. Therefore the width of the house increased upward, and so one went up from the lowest level to the highest level through the middle level. Comment in verses 5 to 7, the temple had side rooms that were not accessible from the holy place or most holy place, or visible from there, which would be similar to Solomon's temple. The side rooms, assuming they were like Solomon's temple, ran around the outside of the building on the north, west, and south, 1 Kings 6, 5 to 10. It says they were on every side, but not on the front, we're to understand. The side rooms were in 3 stories, but let's not think they rose above the main rooms of the temple, because in Solomon's temple, the holy place had a 45-foot ceiling with high windows, so that the 2 main rooms were higher than the 3 stories of the side rooms. The side rooms were wider on the second level and wider still on the third level, because the wall between the side rooms and the main rooms was thinner on the second level and still thinner on the third. The offsets in the wall gave a place to lay the floor joists of the side rooms without penetrating the walls of the holy place and most holy place. Ezekiel doesn't explain everything fully because 1 Kings and 2 Chronicles give the details of Solomon's temple, and we should have caught on by now that this temple is very much like it. In verse 6, there were either 30 side rooms on each level, or more likely, in your narrator's reckoning, 30 total. If there were 30 on each level, they would be tiny. Verse 8. I saw also that the house had a raised base all around. The foundations of the side rooms were a full reed of 6 great cubits. The thickness of the wall which was for the side rooms on the outside was 5 cubits. That which was left was the place of the side rooms that belonged to the house. Between the rooms was a width of 20 cubits around the house on every side. The doors of the side rooms were toward an open area that was left, one door toward the north and another door toward the south. The width of the open area was 5 cubits all around. Comment in verse 8, the temple sat on a raised foundation 10.5 feet off the courtyard pavement. In verse 9, the thickness of the temple wall separating the main rooms from the side rooms was 8.75 feet, and that was probably its thickness at the first level because, as we said, the wall got thinner stepwise on the second and third stories. It's not that if someone were standing in the holy place or most holy place, they would see the offsets. The offsets were on the other side of the wall toward the side rooms. In verse 10, there was a free space, meaning a courtyard of 20 cubit width all around the temple on every side, which is 35 feet. In verse 11, there's the explanation of how the side rooms would be accessed. Outside the side rooms, there was a free space or terrace of 5 cubits width, which is 8.75 feet. The terraces, presumably one for each level, ran around the building outside the side rooms. The doors of the side rooms opened to the terrace, either north or south, and we presume there had to be stairs up to the terraces. Coming up, there was a building west of the temple, verse 12. The building that was before the separate place at the side toward the west was 70 cubits wide, and the wall of the building was 5 cubits thick all around, and its length 90 cubits. Comment in verse 12, the separate place on the west is also translated courtyard on the west. So the gist of verse 12 is that on the west side of the temple, which was its backside, there was a courtyard, and facing that courtyard there was a separate building opposite the temple. The building was 90 by 70 cubits, plus the exterior walls of it, to make it 100 by 80 cubits, which is 175 by 140 feet. So the footprint was 24,500 square feet. The temple, accounting for the holy place, most holy place, side rooms, and thickness of the walls, had an exterior footprint of 142 by 88 feet, not counting the gate and porch on the front. Your narrator knows this because he used scissors and graph paper to lay out the floor plan to scale. So the temple had a footprint of 12,500 square feet, and as we said, the building behind was 24,500 square feet. So the building behind was about twice the square footage of the temple. There's no mention of the height of either building, but surely the building behind wasn't as tall as the temple for aesthetic reasons. Verse 13. So he measured the house 100 cubits long, and the separate place and the building with its walls 100 cubits long. Comment in verse 13, the house, which is the temple, was 100 cubits long, or 175 feet, which is the length of it from its face on the east to the opposite end on the west. This is the first time Ezekiel has given us the total length. From front to back, his numbers add up if we include the front gate and porch. Specifically, the front gate was 3 cubits, the porch with its stairs were 11 cubits, and door jambs and thickness of the wall were 6 cubits in verses 1 and 5. The sides of the entrance to the holy place was 5 cubits, and the holy place 40 cubits, the most holy place 20 cubits. The rear wall of the most holy place 6 cubits thick, and the width of the storeroom on the rear 4 cubits, and the width of the storeroom's exterior wall 5 cubits. It all adds up to 100, which is again the total that was given in verse 13. In accounting for the total length of the temple from front to back like that, it stands out that there was never any mention of a wall between the holy place and most holy place. All the other walls were described as to their thickness, but not that one, if there was one. So it makes us wonder whether Yahweh will be veiled at all when he inhabits the temple. The entry to the most holy place had posts, so that might imply there was a wall or door there, but if there was, why was no thickness given, and why do the numbers add up perfectly without that thickness being included? Since all the numbers add up from front to back, it tells us something else, which is that none of the numbers have been corrupted in the 2,500 years since Ezekiel wrote this chapter. Clearly, the scribes over the millennia took their work seriously. They copied the numbers accurately and transmitted an accurate copy of the text all the way down to us. Proceeding further in verse 13, the length of the courtyard behind the temple was 100 cubits, or 175 feet, and the length of the separate building in the rear was the same, matching the length of the courtyard, which tells us that the long side of that building behind the temple faced the back of the temple. Verse 14. Also the width of the face of the house and of the separate place toward the east, 100 cubits. Comment, in verse 14, as a person stood in front of the temple looking at the face of it, the courtyard ran 100 cubits from left to right, which is north and south, is the same length as the courtyard behind the temple. Now regarding the building behind verse 15, he measured the length of the building before the separate place which was at its back, and its galleries on the one side and on the other side, 100 cubits from the inner temple and the porches of the court, the thresholds and the closed windows and the galleries around on their 3 stories, over against the threshold, with wood ceilings all around, and from the ground up to the windows, now the windows were covered, to the space above the door, even to the inner house and outside, and by all the wall all around inside and outside by measure. Comment, our translation is indecipherable from verses 15 to 17. Other translations put a period or semicolon in verse 15, which makes it all make sense. In verse 15, to repeat the length of the building at the back of the temple, meaning the aspect of that building that bordered the courtyard at the back of the temple, was 100 cubits or 175 feet. Then in verses 15 to 17, the following were paneled with wood. The inside of the holy place, the vestibules as one comes in from the courtyard, the thresholds, the narrow windows, the interior of the galleries, which are the side rooms, up to their thresholds, all the ceilings, and from floor level up to the windows, also made of wood in verse 17, the space above the door and all the walls inside and outside the inner rooms of the temple. And by the way, Solomon's temple was also paneled with wood, but no wood was showing because it was all plated with gold. 1 Kings 6:22, including the floor being plated with gold. 1 Kings 6:30. At today's prices, Solomon used $2.5 billion worth of gold just in the holy place. 2 Chronicles 3:8. Ezekiel doesn't mention anything about the wood being gold-plated, but we should probably assume that it was. Ezekiel's holy place and most holy place have the same dimensions as Solomon's in terms of cubits, but Ezekiel's cubit is longer, about 21 inches versus 18 inches. Therefore, Ezekiel's holy and most holy places were a little bigger. Concerning all this wood, there was a measured pattern on it in verse 17. Coming up, what was that pattern? Verse 18. It was made with cherubim and palm trees. A palm tree was between cherub, and every cherub had 2 faces, so that there was the face of a man toward the palm tree on the one side, and the face of a young lion toward the palm tree on the other side. It was made like this through all the house all around. Cherubim and palm trees were made from the ground to above the door. The wall of the temple was like this. Comment, in verses 18 to 20, the wood paneling had alternating cherubim and palm trees, probably carved or somehow embossed into the wood. Each cherubim had 2 faces, the face of a man toward the palm tree on the one side, and the face of a young lion toward the palm tree on the other. Back in verse 17, the wood was inside and outside, but it's not clear to your narrator what Ezekiel means by outside. Does that mean the exterior or just outside the holy place, like in the vestibule? Verse 21. As for the temple, the doorposts were squared. As for the face of the sanctuary, its appearance was as the appearance of the temple. Comment, in verse 21, the face of the sanctuary is the face of the building. It had the appearance of the temple with alternating cherubim and palm trees. So it could be in verse 17 that the exterior surfaces were indeed paneled with wood and plated with gold. Now the altar for burnt offerings in front of the temple, verse 22. The altar was of wood, 3 cubits high, and its length 2 cubits. Its corners, its length, and its walls were of wood. He said to me, "This is the table that is before Yahweh." Comment, the altar in verse 22 is presumably the golden altar of incense, because the description of the altar of burnt offerings is coming later. In verse 22, regarding the altar, quote, "This is the table that is before Yahweh," end quote, which means when Yahweh comes to inhabit the house, the golden altar of incense will be right in front of him. The footprint of the altar is 3.5 feet square. For it to be described as a table, it was very high at 5.25 feet. Now concerning the front doors, verse 23. The temple and the sanctuary had 2 doors. The doors had 2 leaves each, 2 turning leaves, 2 for the one door and 2 leaves for the other. There were made on them, on the doors of the temple, cherubim and palm trees like those made on the walls. Comment in verses 23 to 25, there were 2 front doors with 2 leaves each, so 4 panels total. But there was only 1 opening, we know, because there were only 2 posts at the end of the last chapter. Each panel of the doors would be about 4.5 feet wide to cover the opening, which was 17.5 feet in verse 2. It would take massively strong doorposts to support doors like that, but Yahweh has it covered with doorposts 10.5 feet square in verse 1. Still in verse 25. There was a threshold of wood on the face of the porch outside. There were closed windows and palm trees on the one side and on the other side on the sides of the porch. This is how the side rooms of the house and the thresholds were arranged. Comment in verse 41, the sides of the porch and the sides of the temple along the side rooms and their entries were decorated with windows and palm trees. Depending on the translation, the windows were either narrow, latticed, or closed. Ezekiel 42 is next.